Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is a skill sharing conversation on book challenge toolkits. I am happy to introduce Linda Tripp from Somerset County Library System and Judith Pissano from Gloucester County Library System. I do want to reiterate again that this is intended to be a safe space, so I am happy to keep everything confidential. I will be editing the recording to edit out any personal information that you might share. So feel free to share openly here, and we can also make sure the recording is just, free of any overly personal details about yourself or your library or any challenges you may be facing. So in the meantime, thank you again for being here. And Linda and Judith, do you want to introduce yourself? Linda, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Tripp. I'm a collection development librarian at the Somerset County Library System, and I've been in my position for about 8 years now. I'm part of a team, so we split up our responsibilities, but we all collectively are responsible for responding to any book challenges that come our way. Of course, we do work as a team, so we will create the response to the challenge. We will sort of run it past each other, fine tune it. It will go up the chain of command so that our administrator for the county library does take a look at it and approve of it, and it gets sent out. And in all the years that our department has been responding to the challenges, I do not believe there have been any responses back from the person. So that's something to take to heart, that most likely you're not going to get a pushback. Of course, there's always exceptions to that. If you attended our program at the last conference, Judith and I were part of a group that presented on this topic. So we're going to touch upon a lot of the same things, but we also would love to have feedback and lots of conversation, once we go through some preliminary slides. It's just a couple handfuls of slides.
Great. Thank you, Linda. Yeah, and Judith, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Stephanie. My name is Judith Pissano, and I'm the Assistant Library Director with the Gloucester County Library System. I was the chair of the NJLA Intellectual Freedom Subcommittee for the last 2 years, and I'm part of the regional response team. And as Linda mentioned, we presented on this topic at the last conference, and being involved with NJLA as the chair, I've seen a lot of challenges come through, so I have a little bit of firsthand knowledge of the issue. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I can go ahead and share the slides. Okay, yeah, just give me 1 sec.
So just to give some context, some of these slides were presented at the conference program session that we did, and I just thought it would be sort of a good visual and get us started on our conversation. So please feel free to comment as we go through just these kind of the structure of how we see. It's important to have a plan in place, and we'd love to get feedback from you all.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, great. So as I said, we talked a lot about book challenges over the past year and how they're increasing so rapidly. And you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So basically, this is the statistics that ALA put out from their Office of Intellectual Freedom from 2022. The graphs say it all. You don't need to really discuss it. It jumped dramatically the last year. You can go ahead and advance. And primarily that's because of the lists that went out on social media, the concerted efforts by a very, very small group of people who are sharing lists of titles and, sort of put together a playbook to get other interested people who have their same agenda. And so this is the preliminary data from just this year through August. And unfortunately, the number of unique titles challenged increased by 20% from the same reporting period in 2022. And the reasons why books are being challenged have stayed true to the past. Most often it's books written by or about people of color or members of the LGBTQIA community. And then the unique titles. And then the map just shows, again, where the censorship is, the attempts are taking place. Texas by far leads the country. And you can go ahead and advance. So this was interesting. This was from the same article that I pulled that chart from, or the posting, I guess, on ALA. Challenges to books in public libraries accounted for 49% of those, compared to 16% during that same reporting period last year. So, at first we used to think, oh, public libraries were pretty safe. This is all happening in the schools. And of course, no, that's not true. And we've seen that even here in New Jersey, which is, or other states that maybe aren't deep red South states. So basically, we feel that the best thing you can do is be proactive. Make sure you have collection development policy that has been reviewed, review it frequently, at least yearly, every other year, and procedures in place on how you're going to respond to a challenge. If you're fortunate and you have not responded to one yet, that day is probably coming. Staff training is key. And then after it's not over, you want to make sure you analyze what you did and then report the challenge. And Judith is going to talk a lot about policy and procedures. And you can do slides. So Judith, I'll let you take over.
Thanks, Linda. So the first thing that's really important when you're faced with a challenge is have a really good collection development policy. And so why should you have a collection development policy? It protects against challenges. It ensures that the library's mission and guiding principles are reflected. And it provides a framework for consistent selection in all formats. So decide if your library is going to collect DVDs, books on CD, large print. So it's consistent across the library. State 2 is responsible for your selection. Identify your selectors, whether they're librarians or managers. It's important to identify who they are. And it ensures a diversity of viewpoints. So your mission really should involve a diversity of viewpoints. And it's also important to include some of the statements on intellectual freedom, such as the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, the Library Bill of Rights, and the Freedom to Read statement. And all those can be found on the ALA website. Next slide, please. So these are some quick components of a really good policy. And so if you haven't had a policy, if it hasn't been updated in a while, look at other libraries. Most libraries put their policies on their website. And another source of information is ALA puts out a really great intellectual freedom manual. So they have all the information that you might need. So the first component definitely is it's reflective of your library's mission. It supports intellectual freedom, collection responsibility. Again, who are your selectors? And this is where you would put your reconsideration of library material form. And that form is important if you're presented with a challenge from a patron. Selected criteria, why you're going to select certain books and not select others. Acquisitions, special collections. If you have a special collection, how do you handle that? We currently have a New Jersey collection and it's behind lock and key. Gifts and donations. If you receive donations of library material, let the public know what you're going to do with them. We don't guarantee that we will absorb it into the collection. That can also include donations of furniture, equipment, paintings. So have a clear policy on what you're going to do with that. And last but not least, Collection maintenance and weeding. As libraries, we have a limited amount of space. So as material comes in, we have to purge some of the material. So make it clear to your patrons and the community what you do with your weeded material. We partnered with Baker and Taylor, and we participate in sustainable shells. And we have little libraries throughout the community that we put our weeded material in. So we have that information available if our community wants to know what we're doing with old library material. Next. So definitely keep your library board commission engaged, understand keep them abreast of what's going on, and a statement of support or resolutions. I know the Westfield Memorial Library put together a resolution against book bans. It's a little bit more challenging for myself as we work in a county library system. That's a little bit more difficult for us. But if you work in a smaller library, I recommend or suggest that's a great way to do that. Next, please. Okay, so we had a good policy. It was up to date, but we didn't have a procedure. What happens once we receive a challenge? So we realized we needed to come up with something. So a good procedure establishes a plan of action, ensures consistency, and assigns responsibility. Next, please. So these are some components of a good procedure. So we gathered a team, and we created an evaluation form. So a patron will turn in a reconsideration form. The frontline staff know who that form goes to, and the group leader will look and source for additional copies of the book, so the team can all read it at once. The most important thing is to do it in a very timely manner. So this procedure provides a framework, meaning we will review the book within 2 weeks and decide who will notify the patron. So our procedure includes myself as the assistant director following up with the patron with a letter. And the letters that I've sent out have been very short. It just says the book in question adheres to our selection policy, and therefore it will remain in the collection. We haven't had one book that we have removed. Next. And this is an example of a reconsideration of material form. And again, a lot of libraries have them online, so don't hesitate to look at other libraries. Next, please. Yeah, so this is the professional book review form that the head of youth services put together in my library. So the team fills it out, and she gathers all the information. They read the book, and then they give all the book review forms back to myself. I think this is really good, a really good form to have, because in a sense, it protects the selectors, why they chose that book, what it's really about. I've found that a lot of people that are challenging a book don't necessarily have read the whole book. They've picked out certain sections that they were told were inappropriate, and so they challenge a book. And I think our reconsideration form does ask the patron if they read the book. Next, please. Yeah, so it's really important to train and let the frontline staff know how to handle a challenge. They're necessarily the ones that are going to be confronted. So we took it upon ourselves at my library system to educate, prepare, and support. So educate, just inform them what a book challenge is. Prepare, let them know where the policy is online and where the reconsideration form is. And then support. So support is really important. A lot of, frontline staff are inundated. And so what we put together was some tips and tools. If you go to the next slide. It's just a little card that we came up with where they can put in behind their badge. And it just gives them some pointers, maintain neutral body language, listen. The most important thing is listen, acknowledge the stress that the patron is experiencing, offer an alternative option, explain the collection development policy, or call your supervisor. And yeah, so yeah, call and notify your supervisor. So these are some of the tips and tools that we've implemented at our library, and we just kind of put it behind our badge so we can pull it out. Next. Yeah, so that's all I have. Thank you, Stephanie and Linda.
Yeah, and then just to the final point, after a challenge has occurred in your library, you want to make sure you evaluate how it went. Is there anything missing from the procedure or from the process? And you want to make your updates, before the next time it happens. And then, we strongly encourage you to report your challenge both here to NJLA. On the website, you can find it under the office or the Intellectual Freedom subcommittee, and I have it linked here on the slide. And then also ALA asks that people respond and report challenges to them also.
Awesome. That was great. And I should mention that, yes, as Linda mentioned in the chat, we'll be sharing those presentation slides as well as reconsideration forms, evaluation forms, and other resources with you if you're facing a challenge. I know a few people joined us while we were presenting, so I just wanted to give another reminder that this is being recorded, but we are maintaining privacy. So feel free to share as much as you'd like in the chat or even later during an open conversation portion. And I will be editing personal information out. I realize this is a really difficult and sometimes dangerous topic to talk about. So we do want to maintain your privacy and safety first and foremost. So feel free to share as much as you like here, and we can edit out any personal information later. So with that, I do want to turn it back over to Linda and Judith, who are going to have an open conversation.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. I guess, we can start with any specific questions people have. I don't consider myself an expert on this topic, but I'm happy to, try to answer any questions, or if you just want to share experiences, that's awesome too. Does anybody want to go first?
Yes, you're welcome to put anything in the chat or even unmute yourself if you'd like to share anything. Or if you have any specific questions, yes, Melody raised her hand. So Melody, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question.
So not a question, more of an addition to something you already said. We were in the process at my library of redoing all of our policies. So we've been doing that for several months. You mentioned about gifts and donations within a collection development policy. With our lawyer's recommendation, we actually separated out the donation policy and form from collection development. And then our collection development policy references the donation policy, because most donations and gifts are things that people want to give us, and they don't necessarily need our collection development policy, or we can give them just the relevant parts within that policy. But we found that helpful. So if anybody is looking for a donation policy or form, just let me know. I'm happy to share it. It was passed by our trustees. It was vetted by our lawyer. We're not quite finished our collection development policy redo, but that's how we opted to handle that, if that's helpful to anybody else.
Yeah, Melody, that would be great. I may reach out to you after if you can share your donation gift policy. I think that isn't a large issue for many of us. So I will share that with everyone afterwards as well. But thank you for sharing. That's really helpful. And anyone else is welcome to either unmute yourself or put something in the chat if you'd like to chime in as well. I see that Amy has been putting some helpful resources in the chat from RTT and Pen America. So I will share this with everyone afterwards as well.
Yeah, so just quickly, Stephanie and Linda, I did mention in the beginning about the regional response team, and Amy Penwell is in a leadership role. She's part of NJSL, and it's a really strong partnership between NJSL and NJLA members. And the regional response team is a group of volunteers that when a challenge comes in, they're tasked with going to like a school board and speaking out and or writing op-eds, or as Amy wrote, book resumes, so that once there's a challenge at a library or a school, they have the information available. And yeah, so that's if you're interested in joining that, there's a link on our NJLA website as well. And yeah, so it's been going about 2 years now. Yeah, and it's a really strong partnership between the School Librarian Association and NJLA. Thanks.
Judith, do you have a sense of how many responses they've had to do since they've been formed?
Yeah, so I think beginning of the year, last year, they were pretty busy. I know Karina, the current president, the problem is, I'll be honest, is we feel like we're always trying to catch up, that we hear about these challenges at school boards at the last minute. So having the ability to reach out to someone local that can go to that school board meeting. There was one up north and I couldn't certainly go because I live in South Jersey. And so, we reached out to Karina and she was able to go to the school board and make a statement. As far as numbers, I don't really have a tally. We've gotten a variety of different challenges that came through NJLA reporting form. And a lot of times people just want to report it. And they want someone to call them and talk to them. I've called different directors because they just want to know that they're doing the right thing, or they just want someone to talk to, just to ease, because it can be upsetting, and it very disruptive, and sometimes we get emotional about it. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. That was helpful. And I see Catherine has her hand raised, and then we'll go to Anna next. So Catherine, do you want to share a question or experience?
Sure. Thank you so much. And I don't want to take up too much time. But so my name's Catherine Baird. I'm actually at Montclair State University. So I don't know, I'm going to guess a lot of the folks in the room are from public libraries and school libraries. But I just wanted to share a comment that I'm getting some requests and interest from faculty teaching courses or education students, so largely education courses, where the students are interested in studying and looking at book bans, the history of book bans, the current situation with book bans. So I just wanted folks to know that that's something definitely our students are interested as well in some of the university courses. So no question, just a lot of thanks for putting this together. And thank you also for sharing your materials and your slides. So if I have a question, I'll pose it later in the chat, but I'll let other people have some of the space in the room. So thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Catherine. That actually is good to know. I didn't realize that. So that is really helpful. And really also insightful to know that students are looking into this and wanting to do more research and historical background on it. So that is really important. I also see Anna's question in the chat, and she is asking if anyone can elaborate on how they've trained staff about book challenges. Was it virtual training, a session during an in-service day, an email? That's a really great question. So Linda and Judith, do you want to start? Judith, I know you've mentioned training your staff, frontline staff especially. So how was that for you? Was it professional development, an in-person meeting? Yeah, I'm happy to learn more about that as well.
Sure. So I started probably about 3 years ago, on the tail end of the pandemic, a lunchtime talk, and I host it once a month, and we talk about different topics, and staff can join. They can do it during work time. So a lot of the topics started off with book bans and book challenges and just understanding what they are. They last about an hour. You don't have to take your lunch, although it's called lunchtime talk. You don't have to take your lunchtime to attend. The administration here was very receptive to this, staff, working with staff, peer-to-peer information sessions. So that's how we've done it. We've done a talk at our in-service day. And then I know a lot of people just come to me to ask different questions. So that's how we started doing that, virtually, yes.
Yeah, for our system, I believe it's part of the training when new employees come on board. If they're going to be a public-facing position, it'll be there. I don't believe there have been separate trainings, but it's certainly something that I personally would love to see in the future. I'm not sure, how soon that'll be put together, but I think the people on the frontline staff, on the front lines have so much to think about and do and execute. So it probably wouldn't hurt to have a refresher on that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And I know Jill mentioned in the chat, they have done virtual training with staff or planning an in-person training session with the attorney hired by the Library Commission. They also plan to have the Library Commission attend the in-person training with the attorney. And I see, Mary Fran posted their revised policy, and I will be sharing that with everyone afterwards. So thank you. If anyone else has any experience with how have you trained frontline staff, especially like your library assistants, your search staff, or really on the front lines of these, feel free to put any information in the chat or feel free to share. Mary Fran, do you have an experience with that as well?
Not entirely. I would just offer that John Stratzka at every library was an invaluable resource when the North Hunterdon and Voorhees High School book bans were hitting the forefront 2 years ago, and then 3 years ago. Before that, we had Fun Home challenged in 2019, I think it was, and then we had 5 LGBTQ books challenged the following year, and it was a very emotional and drawn out process. It took up hours and hours of board meetings for months, and there was a lot of contention in the community, and it was a close call that the books were kept.
Yep, thank you for sharing. I appreciate your honesty with that. But if anyone else has any experience with either training staff and how to handle book challenges or any questions for Judith or Linda, feel free to put anything in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself too.
I could just add quickly for your library boards and commissions. I know I think they're required to do 12 hours of training, and the state library does offer some trainings, and this was one of their topics over the last couple years. So if your board or your trustees need a refresher, keep your eye out for those types of trainings.
That is a good reminder. Yeah, thank you, Judith. Would anyone else like to share either a question for Judith or Linda, or advice that they've learned along the way, or anything else they want to share about navigating challenges in their communities? Oh, Mary Fran, I agree that Martha Hickson gave a great presentation at Library Link's winter meeting last year, which had some good advice. We did record that, so I can send that in part of the follow-up materials afterwards. I know Patricia has mentioned here that Paramus Library was mentioned in a Facebook post within the Moms for Liberty Bergen County chapter. They discussed booking a meeting room, and then they saw over 800 members of the Facebook page, but not all of them are from the area. And after all that angst, I never heard from them. I think that is very common of people who don't live in the area trying to challenge books in places where they are far removed from their community itself. So I think that is unfortunately surprisingly very common. Mary Ellen has asked here, when getting the word out about a challenge, what is best practice? What works and what doesn't? That's also a really great question. So how have you, Judith and Linda, maybe navigated or advocated for yourselves when faced with a challenge to your local community, to patrons, to staff?
I think that might be a little bit different for a non-school library. I mean, we're not really getting the word out to people about challenges to our material, but I think if a school librarians, choices are being questioned, a school board's involved and the public's involved, I think it's a little bit different. I don't know, Judith, correct me if I'm wrong.
So that's why we encourage everybody to fill out the reporting form. And you can, there is a section where you could say, do you want to be contacted? Yes or no. I've had several teachers in South Jersey fill out the form and reach out to me directly for support. And also, again, the regional response team, you could, send a request to them as well. and we can be as involved as you want or as little as you want. So that's, you know, that's how we operate. I mean, we don't want to shout it out there because, you know, it depends on you and your library system or your school, how much you want to be involved. Oh, one more thing I wanted to say. You were, oh, I just apologies, lost my train of thought. I'll come back.
No problem. Yeah, we'll come back to it too. So Mary Ellen, are you at a public or school library? Just for more additional context, feel free to put in a chat too. See, I think that also might factor in getting the word out as well.
I'm at a small public library. So, you know, I'm just curious when, you know, if you have something that's going to go further than an initial challenge and response, where it then just often becomes an issue at board meetings or things like that. I just don't know how to think about getting the word out. And, you know, would we make a press release on social media? Would we just be quiet and quietly tell people we know are supporters? Would we just let whoever shows up show up? I don't know how to think about that, if it makes sense.
No, that is a great question. Yeah, yeah, I thought Judith, you might have some insight about that.
Yeah, so just for clarification, so a book was challenged, this is just a scenario, a book was challenged, and you reviewed it and your board reviewed it, and then you followed up with the patron with your decision. Are you concerned after that they're coming back and still challenging it? What do you do
Yeah, so
then? Go ahead.
our process is we have a conversation with the director as the first round of challenge, then it goes to a committee, then it goes to the board, and the board has a final say. So just in that process, at some point, I would imagine it would public knowledge get be bigger than just, you know, you and a book, or a couple of people in the library and a book and a patron challenging. And so then what do you do with it?
I guess, you know, from the point of view of your board or your commission, what they feel comfortable with. Just so bear in mind, you might have a soft challenge where your board does side with the patron. So be mindful of that. I mean, as far as a press release, that's something you could do on your own. But it all depends on, you know, what your director wants to do. If they're okay with, you know, sending a press release, fine. If they want to hold back, just I would defer to the admin and your board about, you know, how much vocal they want to be about it. And again, if it becomes bigger than you expect it, reach out to NJLA, reach out to the regional response team, and they'd be happy to come to the next board meeting and speak on behalf of this challenge.
Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. I also wanted to highlight Susan's comment in the chat about how Long Hill recently added the question to the reconsideration form if a challenge is from a resident and a library card holder. That's a really great addition to your reconsideration form. I see Tanya has a question in the chat. If an item is challenged, do you immediately remove it from the collection, or do you keep it in the collection until a decision has been made? I see Amy responded. I would agree with Amy that this is important to be clear about in your reconsideration policy. Amy also says, if a purchase was added following policy, why remove it without following the policy for removals? That is a really great follow-up to that. So I think, Judith, you would probably agree with that as well. And Linda?
So I just wanted to come back. I remember what I wanted to talk about. The reconsideration form. I know a lot of libraries have put a note in the reconsideration form, meaning you can't challenge a book unless you live in that community. So we don't have that in our library system, but I know some smaller libraries have added that. So if you're not a library card holder, you don't live in the community, you're not permitted to challenge one of their books. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, great. Thank you. I see Kate mentioned Hunterdon County includes that line about residency as well. I do see a question from Jill for Judith about the decision to send short decision letters to the request for reconsideration. Jill said that they have been sending long decision letters that include reiterating their policy for collection development and listing reviews and awards for specific titles.
Yeah, so I do reference the policy. I'm always of the mindset less is more. And the review form, we do list, you know, if it has won awards and the reviews. That's just our personal doing. So I always reference our policy, let them know the policies on our website, and I have backup documentation from the reviewers if they come back. As far as criteria, they won awards, why we selected it. That's just a personal preference, Jill.
But yeah, thank you for clarifying that too. And I see Susan in the chat has also said that Long Hill has stated in their policy that the item will remain in the collection until the final review is complete. Once a title has been challenged, if it is kept in the collection, it will not be reviewed again by a separate challenger. Susan, do you mean that the person can't submit another challenge for that same material? Okay, great. That's actually a really good policy to have. Okay, thank you for that clarification. And I see Marianne has some good resources. Mary Fran has some good resources in the chat too from ALA. So I will add that to the list of resources to send to everyone as well. Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing all these great resources in the chat, everyone. If anyone has any more questions for Judith or Linda, or just wanted to share their own experiences, feel free to share also. Emily says they've had a patron record their interaction with me. Oh, those are really challenging too when they're recording and trying to get a reaction from you. They're not sure if it was on live stream and I haven't heard anything about being posted online, but it was still very rattling. What is the best way to go forward should this happen again? Yeah, I know, like, is it like the First Amendment audits or people like coming in, like wanting to like get like a live reaction from us is a huge issue. I know like Matt and Lizzie Latham, who I know they're not on this call, but they have dealt with that a lot. So Emily, I'm happy to put you in touch with them just as before I forget. But also if anyone else has any experiences, Judith and Linda, have you dealt with that too? That's really stressful.
Yeah,
Mary
so that's why we
Francis
put I'm sorry, Steph. That's why we put together that card. Just a quick reminder. And we also have kind of like a system. If we see one of our colleagues in a position, we're encouraged to walk over and stand with them. We've had a lot of other social issues in our library, so it's similar practice that we do in our library.
Okay, great, thank you. I know Mary Fran said that they would offer the reconsideration form and minimize the conversation. I'd also recommend, like Judith said in her presentation, getting a supervisor. I feel like supervisors should really be supporting their frontline and reference staff in these situations as well. I know Kate said they've had a similar experience recently with someone recording a phone call with staff and posting it combined with completely irrelevant images. That's just so difficult. I'm so sorry to hear that. But thank you for sharing from the vulnerability. Yeah, that's such a difficult conversation. And Emily, I'm happy to send you some more resources afterwards as well, just for helping out with that with people who have been through it. Does anyone else have any more questions for Judith or Linda or want to share any more advice? Mary Fran, do you have some advice in that regard as well?
Yeah, it looks like there's some school librarians joining us. And I would say when I was a school librarian, without being specific about the details, that sometimes challenges come from your colleagues. And it's not necessarily a formal challenge, and that might be better met without going through the challenge process, that there are ways to have empathic conversations about why they feel the way they do. Like there was a collection in a middle school library of books about a marginalized group. We had Holocaust resources. I can say that much. And there was an incident in years prior where a child had presented one of these books to a Jewish child and said, "Oh, you should read this," as a measure of bullying. So the solution was thought to be that we got rid of all the Holocaust books. Now, like, as librarians, that will go, no, that, that's just a ridiculous reaction to that. But sometimes it comes from a place of misguided concern for children, or misguided concern that you can sort of steer that before going through the whole process or going through actual censorship, that it's much trickier, especially when you're non-tenured, to have conversations with your principal or the superintendent or whomever, but like that the ALA office and every library can provide you with great resources to go like, oh no, that's not why we do this, and to have a really thoughtful and empathic reply.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback too. I agree that having an empathic reply is really helpful. I'm kind of like Linda and Judith mentioned in their presentation, listening, even though it is really, hard in a moment because you're always on edge in these situations, but being empathic and listening before responding is really helpful.
There's one area that we don't really talk about too much is soft challenges, meaning coming from your colleagues and coworkers. As Mary just mentioned, I have 2 selectors that refuse to order LGBTQI books. Rather than make a big deal out of it, I've just given that duty to someone else. But yeah, so just be mindful of that as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Like you brought that up, I was going to actually mention soft challenges because that is something that is really common that we don't talk about as much as we should. Yeah, would anyone else like to chime in or has a question for Judith or Linda, or just wants to share anything about their experiences, or has a question of how we can help you navigate challenges in your community?
I would also
Carl
note
has a
that, like,
great question.
some of the challenges are coming to the policy and not to the books themselves. I think we've had that in North Hunterdon recently. I haven't been able to closely follow them because their meetings are the same night as my library board meetings. But to hack away at maybe the librarian selection power and the authority of it, whether or not it rests in the superintendent or in the library media staff, or where the challenge process falls, is also being looked at by Moms for Liberty groups. Also, like, curriculum is not a book challenge, but it's also part of your scope as a library media specialist, and those seem to be more popular in some New Jersey schools lately.
Thank you, Mary Fran. I really agree. That was really helpful insight too. Yeah, I wanted to highlight a few recent comments. I know Carl has asked if anyone has experienced someone challenging an ebook. Given that we don't get to select the books in Hoopla, I'm not sure how to respond to a challenge. That is a really great question I have not thought of before. So has anyone else had experience with that? I wouldn't be sure how to respond either. Judith or Linda, have you ever experienced that?
We don't have Hoopla, so I can't respond to that. And I have not heard of any challenges to any Overdrive ebooks.
So we haven't had a challenge, but something was brought to our attention with Hoopla. They just send you materials, and some of the books were self-published and I don't know, violent. So we had a team of our reference librarians going through and just deleting those. It's kind of like a system of whack-a-mole. So that's what we've experienced lately. And our ILS administrator has been cleaning up the records for those. But we haven't had a formal challenge.
Okay, great. I know Mary Fran said that they curate Hoopla to only have items that have professional reviews. So that is a good tip. Melody, do you have any suggestions in that regard?
I do. I have my draft collection development policy up. We're still getting final approval, but I can read you just the section it specifically says about that question, which is it says, electronic and digital resources are of increasing importance and popularity with Bayonne Library patrons. Electronic resources refer to those materials or services that require a computer or another device for access, including but not limited to numerical, graphical, and textual files, electronic journals, ebooks, digital media, bibliographic or full-text databases, and internet resources. Some of these resources, when e-content is picked directly by the staff, will observe the same collection policies as print materials. Resources provided by the State Library of New Jersey, as well as vendors that provide base collections of their own for their resources, will have items selected by those organizations' individual collection development policies. These collections are subject to their vendors and publishers' collection development policies and licenses. Issues concerning technology, access, maintenance, and vendor support, as well as licensing terms, are additionally considered for e-resources. So basically, what we pick, but we are also in agreements where we don't have control over what's picked, and that's up to the terms of our agreements with those vendors. We do have Hoopla, so this is, something that we felt we needed because we don't have control over what's in the Hoopla collection, really. If we know of specific titles, we do have the ability to turn them off. We haven't gotten any complaints about Hoopla, but we also have a lot less control over that collection than the things we pick. So I think it's helpful to have that, like, hey, we may not be choosing this in there somewhere.
And that is really helpful to have in your policy. Thank you for sharing that too. Yeah, I really appreciate that feedback. I know in the chat, Jill has mentioned that they just discussed yesterday that they need to post signs indicating their private areas as a library, such as offices, staff kitchen, in case we do have anyone coming in who wants to record in the library. And they do have a separate photography, recording, and filming policy reviewed by the county lawyer, but not yet by the library's commission lawyer. I like that you have a policy about that. I've never thought about having a separate recording policy. So that is actually a really great idea. So thank you for sharing that. I can share that with everyone afterwards as well. Christy asked if anyone has any policies in place regarding staff challenges. Was that soft challenges specifically, Christy? Do you have a separate policy, Judith, for soft challenges? Or is it part of your overall policy?
No, we don't have an internal policy for soft challenges. I kind of defer to the manager, and rather than make it a big thing, we just respect their decision for, and go from there. But no, we don't have any internal policy for that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Melody, what about you?
Sorry, I do have one more thing related to what you're saying about filming. We included filming in the library as part of our patron code of conduct policy. I just pulled that up. Our lawyer's recommendation was basically like, you don't want to explicitly say filming because patrons do have amendment rights to film in public places. So you can't explicitly say you can't film in the library because legally you can't do that. So what we ended up with as part of our much longer list of rules of behavior that would likely be prohibited is engaging in conduct directly or with the use of any electronic or other device which creates unreasonable levels of noise or is disturbing to others. Cell phone use is only permitted in the lobby area of the library. So basically, you could put filming under that category if they are being really aggressive about it. I mean, obviously you may have people that come in and just, film, and they're legally allowed to do that. So we don't have a specific policy because our legal rights as a library surrounding that are not as strong as they would be if we were a private, organization.
Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing your policy too. Sounds like you have a really great solid policy so far. So I appreciate you sharing that information.
That's been my work over the last 6 months, is rewriting pretty much every policy that we have or creating ones that we didn't have. So a lot of this is particularly fresh for me.
So no, thank you. Yeah, you're doing a great job so far. So in terms of soft challenges, Mary Fran says that if a board member challenges an item, they may not be part of evaluating its reconsideration. That is also a really good solid policy to have. So thank you for sharing that. So I'm making sure I'm catching up on everything in the chat. I like that people are sharing their policies here as well. Mary Fran sharing their behavior policy, which is, well, they have a good policy about filming without consent. So yeah, I really like that people have these policies in place and are developing these policies, which is really helpful to have. I know Michael has shared some information from ALA's Office of Intellectual Freedom. So thank you for sharing that as well. So I'll add that to the list of resources to share afterwards. Just having like a good list for me to share, which is really helpful. Making sure I'm catching up on everything here in the chat. Yeah, so Carl, please keep us updated if you have, if you do get challenges about ebooks, and we're happy to help. I'm sharing everyone's contact information afterwards, so feel free to reach out to myself, Judith, or Linda, and then we can happily help you navigate how to work through that. And I agree, Michael, these links that you're sharing in the chat are really helpful. Yeah, Michael, that's really helpful about reviewing your own policies. Do you do that on a regular basis? I feel like we probably should, actually. So that is really helpful. That's actually a question for probably you, Judith and Linda. Do you update your policies on a yearly basis? Just your collection development and all those policies, or no, or just like filming policies or conduct policies?
So we're in the process of updating all of our policies right now. So it's good to look at them periodically and update them. I don't know if there's like a standard time frame, like 3 to 5 years. Some of our policies we realized haven't been changed since 2012, and they're really antiquated. So yeah, it was time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think yearly's probably asking a lot, but yeah, we're in the middle of doing several of our policies, and I think most of them had been done in the last like half dozen years. So that's not really my department, but yeah, we're certainly involved in certain parts of it.
Great, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I agree that, Michael, we don't always review these policies often enough. So yeah, so shout out to Melody for actually redoing all these policies as you came on. That's really great. Yeah, that you're doing this right away. No, it's so important too, because I feel like you never know when you need to refer back to these. So it's really helpful. I know Amanda says that they review regularly, which is great, and encourage staff to do the same during downtime. That's really great that you actually encourage staff to look at the policies as well. So, Michael also mentioned in the past, many of the policies have been siloed by department, so they're working on consolidating everything. I think many of us can relate, Michael. So that is very relatable, and I'm glad you're working together to consolidate and collaborate. Yeah, I agree, Kate, that encouraging staff to look at these policies in their downtime is really important, since we don't always, kind of remember or set the date on our policies. Okay. Oh, and Tanya recommends reviewing policies every 2 to 3 years. Okay, I like that guideline. I know, I feel like yearly is very ambitious. So I was like, that's a little ambitious, even, for us. But yeah, 2 to 3 years is good, even though that can be tough too, but it is really helpful, especially with like First Amendment audits though, since those are so unfortunately common now. It's really helpful to have the updated conduct, harassment, behavior policies, in addition to collection development and everything too. Oh, Melody says evaluating your policies every year is also a lot of work for your trustees. That is actually a really great point too, to keep the trustees and board up to date too. Catherine mentioned, I heard one person mention a lawyer. Does everyone have lawyers to ask questions to as needed? I think many of us do, but I would say, does everyone here have a library with a lawyer that you can refer to? And if you don't, are you looking into that? I know Judith and Linda, I know you both have referred to lawyers in the past. I know Melody has as well. Melody said that they have a wonderful lawyer who specializes in public libraries, and she's happy to recommend him as needed. I would recommend Melody. I would recommend also, as Melody said, getting a lawyer who specializes in libraries specifically, just so they're familiar with challenges. If you, Catherine, I know you're at an academic library. There are some lawyers who specialize in academic libraries as well. So I'm also happy to share some resources on that end. But I would also recommend having a lawyer if possible. Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that access isn't a problem, but that is a really good question. That is really helpful just in case. I mean, you never know, unfortunately. So it is really helpful to have one that you can refer to. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss any questions. So if anyone has any final questions for us, feel free to unmute yourself or put anything in the chat. Yeah, and we are happy to help. I'm glad to see all this positive feedback in the chat as well. Oh, I like how Melody mentions their lawyer also attends monthly trustees meetings, which is beneficial to both Melody and the trustees. That is actually really great. I know not all lawyers do that, so that is really great that your lawyer does that. Yes, thank you everyone for being here too. This is such great information. I'm glad you all found it useful too. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to share all the documents and resources with everyone afterwards. And I will share our contact information. So if you have anything you want to email us afterwards, you're welcome to get in touch with me, with Susan, with Linda, or with Judith. And yes, I will make sure I'm saving everything and let me stop recording. But before I do, I wanted to say thank you, Linda and Judith, for being here, for sharing your insight, your wisdom, all the resources that you shared with us. Well, it is wisdom, Judith, because you have all this knowledge and resources, you know, just the lunches with your frontline staff. This has been so helpful. So thank you again for being here. So I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.